So today's resolution that we're debating is this House would eliminate the executive order. Now today we're going to define this as a policy round because it implies an act or and an action. This House is going to be defined as the United States federal government, and would implies an action. And so we're going to say the United States federal government would eliminate the executive order. We can't define it as a fact resolution because it's not comparing two things, saying that this would be better than this, and we can't define it as a value resolution because it's not comparing two values. So thus we're left with a policy resolution. Today, now we're going to go into some background. All the definitions are contextual in the resolution other than USFG. If you guys have questions about it, let me know. This House, so the background is in the recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the proper use and possible use of the executive order. Many citizens and lawmakers expressed concern towards Congress, how they responded with hearings. There's a couple different kinds of presidential directives. First, there is a wartime directive, which is completely different than the executive order. The executive order is essentially legislation not used in wartime. Wartime policy actually falls into a different category, so we're not talking about wartime policy. It is a functional direction issued when there are written instructions from the president to communicate a presidential decision or declaration to a broad group of people, including government officials, general public, or even foreign affairs. And so it does have to have some effect, and that is from the Heritage Organization. And so we can see that there have been over 7,300 presidential proclamations since the Constitution has been in place. Obviously, this is a very large amount of executive orders and needs to be curtailed. So today our mandate is going to be the Congress will amend the Constitution to eliminate executive orders by the president. We can see that usually...
Yeah, will you repeat that for us?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Congress will amend the Constitution to eliminate executive orders by the president. So today we're going to go into three different advantages. My first is going to be upholding checks and balances. The background here is the founders put into place of the separation of powers explained in the Federalist Papers of Article 1, 2, and 3. The purpose was to keep the powers separate so there wasn't essentially a dictatorship that took over or the Supreme Court that could take over. Instead, each three branches would have equal power in order to keep checks and balances. But currently in the status quo, we see presidents abusing that consistently. Over 73 presidential proclamations is an outrageous amount for people to be essentially putting legislation in that is not approved by the Congress. The link here is its abuse of legislative powers. It essentially takes away the powers away from the legislative branch and gives it to the executive branch. The internal link is it's supposed to be the House and Senate that make these decisions. But because of the executive orders by the president, it passes through them and makes it so really the people have no say. The president is the only has one say. And because he's one person with one political party, this is no longer any bipartisan decisions, and it's no longer within the bounds of the people deciding, because we are a democracy based on people's decision votes. But instead, one man gets to decide where essentially the United States is going to go with this legislation. The impact here is we essentially eventually lead to a dictatorship. One executive order after another is inherent abuse in the current system. Question 2 of 2.
Okay. How do we get from the president passing executive orders to dictatorships?
Yeah, so essentially the president right now is passing legislation that's not approved by the people, the House, or the Senate, and the House or the Senate. And so eventually he's going to just keep doing this. The United States isn't stepping in at all and stopping this. And so we need to see that the United States needs to step in and stop. I'm no longer taking questions for this speech. Needs to step in and actually stop the abuse of powers by the president, because once he takes one step, it's a slippery slope. He takes another step and he can essentially make any argument or any legislation with no one stepping in. So we essentially see that one branch of government has all the power and the president can do whatever he wants. We can even see there was rumors that Obama would make an executive order to eliminate term limits so he could run for another presidency. Now, he never did this. However, it was a rumor that he actually wanted to do so he could take over the presidency year after year after year because he believed he could be reelected. And this essentially, again, leads to a dictatorship, which is inherently harmful when we're trying to go for a democracy. So the solvency here is we actually eliminate the power of the president to make executive orders, so we can't abuse those executive orders to give more power to himself and take power away from the other branches. Because when you take power when you're taking more power, you have to take it from somewhere. Power is and should be limited. My advantage 2 is that there's no longer a legitimate use of the executive order. The background here is that the American presidents have had various types of presidential executive orders that are supposed to be used for essentially national security, but that's no longer happening. And so they're not protecting anyone's safety with these executive orders. We can see that President Obama actually made an executive order about immigration, and this is not protecting anyone's safety in the United States. This is not protecting citizens whatsoever. So what is the purpose of this executive order? The internal link is we're harming trust in the government and in the people. The government is essentially saying that they don't trust the people to make these decisions for themselves, and the people don't trust the government because they're abusing their power. We need transparency, and the executive orders are not creating transparency. Currently in the status quo, executive orders, when they are first put out, are actually classified, and they have to be declassified for the people to find out what they actually did. This creates a decrease in trust in the government. The impact here is the different branches break apart because one branch takes all the power. The executive branch takes the power away from the Supreme Court and away from Senate and the Congress when they are the ones supposed to be making the legislation. There's too much party division currently in the status quo, and this would just further that party division. When one party takes more power away from the rest, when we have a Democratic president, but a Republican Congress, the Republican Congress feels like they have no voice because the Democratic president inherently disagrees with them. Thus, he can make an executive order to essentially do whatever he wants. We can see then that leads to a broken government and harming our human rights. Our advantage 3 is lawful orders, but a bad policy. Yes, this was good when it was first started. However, it became inherently harmful. Clinton's executive orders were actually illegal and improper in their policies, and Obama has some of the same. We can see this is happening over and over and over with every presidency. The link is there's an abuse of this executive order, so it needs to be taken away. The internal link is it harms democracy and takes the power away from the people who it's given to in the Constitution, harming the Constitution, which is the basis of our government. The impact here is we need legitimate legislation provided by the legitimate branch that's supposed to be doing it.
So as a brief off
I
time.
think they want you to stick up here.
Oh, yeah. I'm not used to this. Okay. So as a brief off-time roadmap, we're going to have 2 or 3 off-case and 2 off-case. So which one are we doing? Just that one? We're not going to do the other one? This one?
First one.
Okay. So, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to have 2 off-case, and then we are going to go on-case, which is the affirmative case. So starting time. The first position we're going to run is the topicality. Our interpretation is of the House. And the House for this resolution has to be the executive branch because the executive power, the executive order is power of the executive branch, and the executive branch is the only one that can take it away. Our violation is that they are not using the executive branch, they're using Congress to take this power away. Going on to our standards, our first standard is of resolutional integrity. We have to go by the resolution. We can't just nitpick everything and kind of tweak it to what we want. We have to do what the resolution says, and the resolution is about an executive order, and the executive orders are under the direct power of the executive branch, which is the president. So if we want to get it repealed, we have to if we want to get rid of it, we have to make the president has to do this. Going on to the second point is predictability. Our opponents are not being predictable. They're not going by the exact resolution, so that means that the negative side is now losing ground because they're not going by what the resolution says, which is of an executive order, and that means executive branch doing this, getting rid of this power. Going on to, I'll get you at the end of this, or the end of the topicality. Going on to our third point of reasonability, they have to be reasonably resolutional, correct? Okay. So, and they are not being reasonably resolutional because they're not using the executive branch, which is what you have to do to get rid of an executive order. Going on to our fourth point of education, we really need to stress education in this round because debate is a form of is what helps people get into politics and help people learn about politics. And if people don't understand that an executive action, an executive order, or executive powers are part of the executive branch, then we're not creating a educational environment for people to understand about the government. Because if people don't understand that, then they are not going to understand anything about the government. And we're going to our voters. Our voters are a priori, or that's our first voter, and that voter means that this is an issue you have to look at first, because if our opponents are not being resolutional, then this is making for an unfair debate and as our senators mentioned, unpredictable and unreasonable. Our second voter is of jurisdiction. As a judge, you can only vote for things that are within AF ground or within neg ground, and this is going outside of the ground because they're not adhering to the resolution. So what is your question?
Yeah, so who is able to amend the Constitution, the president or Congress?
Congress, but this isn't an amendment.
Okay.
This is our part of the second article of the Constitution. So going on to our dissad of checks and balances, our uniqueness is our A point, is that the second article of the Constitution is what directly talks about what the president can do, how he can be elected, what his powers are, and it directly relates to this resolution, because this is where you find he gets his executive powers. Going on to our subpoint off of that, the framers of the Constitution did this so that we would have a balanced government. They didn't want one section of government having too much power. They didn't want the president to have a bunch of power. They didn't want the legislative to have a bunch of power, and they didn't want the judicial branch to have a bunch of power. So they made it separate. So they made that the president could execute order things so that the Congress didn't just have all the power. So going on to our second point, our B point of that is that most executive orders are based on judicial review. So that means that judicial review kind of gave the president the power to get executive orders. We can see this with the Emancipation Proclamation. Congress was not going to allow the freedom of people in slavery. It had been debated forever. It was debated when the Constitution first arose. It was debated during the Missouri Compromise. It was debated later, and the whole Civil War happened because Congress could not pass it because they didn't everything get passed. So Abraham Lincoln had to do an executive order to make sure that slavery no longer existed, and this was a really good thing. And we can see the positive impacts of, I'll get you at that time at the end of the disadvantage. And we can see that, that the executive orders can do a lot of good things, and that without this, we probably would still have slavery in America, because slavery is so controversial that nobody was willing to touch it. Going on to our links, that plan passes, and that our B point is that the executive orders are now gone, so now there are no longer any checks and balances in government. Our internal links are that Congress is now going to have most of the power, and our B point under that is that in the status quo, Congress is really bad. They have very bad reviews. Congress is always in gridlock because there's so much division in Congress. Nobody can agree on anything, and that means that more and more bills, even more than right now, are going to fail to pass, and they're just going to get tabled because Congress cannot agree on anything. Going on to our impacts, our first impact is immigration. Right now, there is a DREAM Act going up for review in Congress, and the DREAM Act is that where a child who was born in the U.S. but has parents that were not citizens of the U.S. can get a college education, and it's being reviewed by Congress right now, and right now, with how Congress is so split and how Congress is so divided, we need an executive order to get this to pass, because if not, that means right now, the reason it's not going to pass in Congress is because in the House of Representatives, a majority of the people in there are Republican, and they do not agree with this ideology and the ideology behind this bill. And so now we are reducing, when this act is not passed or is repealed, and we're no longer going to have education, and without education, people can't get out of poverty. So these children of immigrants who, by being immigrants, already have a problem by being in poverty and are statistically more likely to be in it, and in that lower level of income, they're now going to have even less of a chance to get out of it, because education is the key to getting out of impoverished lifestyle. It's how you get jobs. It's how you don't end up in a life of crime, because now you have that option. But without this, we're just condemning people to just be stuck in the cycle of poverty. Our second impact is of executive action. Is that how we need to put an executive action to put troops in Syria? We need ground troops in Syria. Now, this isn't in Congress at the moment, but it's going to happen. It's inevitable because of the problems in Syria and problems with ISIS in the Middle East. And we need this to be an executive action, because if we allow ISIS to take Syria, then they're going to have, it's the keystone to the entire Middle East, and ISIS is gearing towards Syria. And when they get Syria, that means they technically control all of the Middle East. And when they have, this gets to our terminal impact, is that by the spread of ISIS, that means we have bad human rights, and there's a lot of human rights abuse, and there's death. And there's also the possibility of nuclear war, because now they're going to have better access to get to Pakistan, which has most of the nukes in the Middle East. That means ISIS is going to be able to have access to those nukes, and that means that they're going to be able to start a nuclear war and create a lot of death, and nobody can come back from death. That you're just gone. Going on to the affirmative case, I'm sorry, I'm not going to read your questions. They're going on. They don't really define what the criteria for this round is, how we should define it, so we're just going to say net benefits. Yeah. and that is how we're going to judge this round, which is who's doing the greater good and doing the most good for everybody. Going on to the background, they mentioned that there's been 7,300 executive orders in that whole entire history of the United States being a democracy and being under the federal constitution. That is, 750 years or 250?
250.
250 years. That means we've had executive orders, and we haven't had any of the negative impacts that they've talked about. That's 250 years for a dictatorship to happen. That's 250 years for the government to just collapse. It hasn't happened, so this background is non-unique. And they also act like the president can just executive order anything he wants, but Congress also, based on the Constitution, has the power to veto that executive order. So that means that Congress can still check and balance them, so it's not just a random system like free-for-all for the president. Going on to their solvency, they don't give you any warrants for their solvency part where, like, saying the president can no longer abuse his executive order power. He's not abusing it right now. We can see it through every president that's happened. They've not abused it because Congress has always been there to check it, and we haven't had this giant dictatorship that they've said is going to happen. So going on to their advantage, one, again, they're not giving you any warrants for their uniqueness, saying that the president's abusing this power. They're not explaining how this gets to the links, how it's taking power from the legislator, and they're not explaining how it gets their impact of dictatorship. They're saying they're going to get dictators, but it hasn't happened in 250 years. So that means that also falls.
Sorry. As the debate goes on, you have more to flow, so more to bring up here. Sorry. Okay, everybody ready? All right, let's get started. Oh, sorry. Okay, I guess we'll do road maps off time. Okay, so I'm just going to be going line by line, so exactly how the Leader of Opposition has laid it out for us. So that's going to be the topicality, then the disadvantages, and then they did some offense on our case. So line by line. Are you ready? Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, blanket thank yous for everyone being here. Thank you for a judge for judging this round, partner for helping me prep, and of course our opponents for prepping an awesome case. Okay, let's get started. So first of all, I think what needs to be addressed is the topicality. The topicality argument is basically that our opponents are saying they don't agree with our definition of how we define the House. And now we have defined the House as the United States federal government. They believe that this needs to be the executive branch instead, and I'm going to tell you why that doesn't work and how that just goes against everything we know of the basic foundations of government. So first of all, one, that's unrealistic. So we're going to put the executive government in charge of making fixes on the executive government. Where's the disconnection here? Secondly, the executive branch can't be in charge of doing in charge of putting fixes on themselves. That goes back to our advantage of separation of powers. The separation of powers means we have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And so essentially we're saying that we have to have the legislative branch be in this and being the actor in it because they have to put the check on the executive branch. The resolution now states this House would eliminate executive order. Now we're defining this House as United States federal government because it is the legislative branch duty to check the executive branch. So therefore we are resolutional and you cannot flow this topicality through, but I'm going to go ahead and address some of the predictability arguments and their educational arguments as well. So their predictability says that we're not resolutional. As I said, the resolution says that there needs to be an actor, and the actor is this House. Now we can't say the executive branch would eliminate executive order. That doesn't make sense. So essentially we're saying the United States federal government or the legislative branch would eliminate executive order. That makes sense. So we are resolutional and that is predictable. Secondly, they said the educational area. They say people, if we don't do this, the people aren't going to get an education. And this should be top priority. First of all, what we need to look at is that it is educational to define the round by what our Constitution is based on. And so essentially we have to say that by doing this, we're upholding the Constitution, upholding the separation of powers. That's educational. We know that there's 3 different types of branches, and so it is more educational to explore the separation of powers on these than it is to just say that the executive branch needs to take the executive branch action. That has no progress for us, and that doesn't allow the people to be involved. So there's more education on the affirmative side by allowing the people to get involved, by allowing the House of Representatives and the Congress and the Senators to be involved in this process. So education is upheld. We can see that that is no longer an argument, and we can take that off of the flow. All right, so second, our next argument is they say that the framers did this so we had balance. So the framers gave the president executive action so we had balance. And we can see this is totally true. We need balance in our government. But what's happening is the framers intended it for be legal action, so legal executive orders. And we can see that the presidents have, such as Bill Clinton and Obama, to an extent, have decided that they're not going to go by the legal things. And we saw, as my partner laid out in the background, that there's two separate things of executive orders. There's the war proclamations, so that is legal. It's legal for them to make any decision they want because he is our commander, or they are commander-in-chief during military and wartime. However, there's a separate executive order. I'll get to your question at the bottom of this, sorry. And that is that it communicates any kind of presidential reason, a declaration to a broad group of people, including government officials, general public, so on and so forth. So that's anything else. We're just giving the president the power to do this and decide for the people, essentially. And that totally goes against what the foundation of the framers intended of the Constitution. So we can see that the framers did intend balance, but only if it was a legal balance. And we can see that the presidents are going against what has been in place, and so they're making illegal executive orders and not going through this, not going through what should be. Since, for example, my partner brought up the immigration should be debated in the legislative branch, as well as which includes Congress and the House of Representatives. So that should be something that we look at. It shouldn't just be the president saying this is what I believe is right. That's not what America is based on. We all in this room want our votes to go for something, and we've elected these officials, the senators and the House of Representatives, in these bodies to essentially support our ideas. And if we're just giving that up to the president, we're not being represented as a people. All right, so they brought up the idea that Abraham Lincoln, he made the executive order to essentially end slavery. And I was going to ask a question on this, and sorry, I have to get to your question. Sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, just clapped.
It's fine. What specific executive orders were illegal? Like, specifically, which ones were illegal?
Okay, so the illegal ones?
Yes.
The illegal ones are the ones that are not the war proclamations, the ones that are not during wartime. The reason the framers intended this is for wartime, because we need somebody who's going to make the hard decisions. We've elected them there, they deserve that. But if there's time for it to go through Congress and time for it to go through the House of Representatives, we want that. That is our right as the people. Last question.
Okay, so I think what my partner's asking specifically, what exact executive order did Bill Clinton do that was illegal? Like, what policy did he, like, enact something? Like, what did he do exactly?
Okay, so Bill Clinton is another example, but the example that we're really need to look at.
Clinton, so I assume Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Okay, and so also Obama and how he's trying to push this immigration on the executive order and saying that we need to let all these people in. That's not going through and being debated by, Congress and by that House of Representatives. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, going on, I tried to ask a question about how they said Abraham Lincoln made the executive order to end slavery, but I was going to ask, was that during wartime? That was during wartime. That was when the Civil War was arising. So that's a wartime proclamation that is a legal executive order. So he had every right to do that because that was legal. So then they also go on to saying this overgeneralization that Congress is bad. Why leave the power to Congress? Obviously, Congress is the voice of the people. If we're going to say that Congress is bad, then is the voice of the people bad? We need to make sure that we have these separation of powers, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, because it gives the people power to speak. So we can't just say Congress is bad, give all the power to the president, because then you have access to our impact, that you do have a dictatorship. So we can see that all of this is a reason to vote for the affirmative side, but I'm going to go on. They go into an impact of immigration in the DREAM Act. First of all, I don't really see a link there. I had a question about that too, but they wouldn't answer, so I can't elaborate anymore on that, about how if we don't have executive orders, there's going to be no DREAM Act and immigration is going to be bad, blah, 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 blah. But we can see that they have no access to this impact, because if we do debate immigration through Congress and through the House of Representatives and so on and so forth, we're going to get the best solution that's going to uphold education for these immigrants. And you're not going to see the terminal impact of ISIS, because we're going to debate and not leave it all up to the president. We're going to have the separation of powers and see that it is going to be best and decide on what situation would be best to eliminate the terminal impact of ISIS coming through. So we can see I'm going to go ahead and go on case now. Sorry. So they wanted to redefine it. We should have touched this earlier, but it is net benefits. That's good. We agree. And then they talk about this 250 years of executive of orders and how if it was so bad, why have we had 250 years of it? What I'd like to say is, or what we'd like to say is those were legal orders. Those are wartime proclamations. And as my partner brought up in the background, many citizens and lawmakers expressed concern because they feel like the president's executive orders are going against what was legal. So that was 250 years of legal executive orders. Now it's in question because they're kind of going over their bounds of what they're put into. So we have solvency and we gain access to each one of our advantages, which is separation of power. We have the advantages of that we bring back legitimate use of executive order, and we also make it lawful orders so we don't have bad policy. So I see no reason except for a vote on the affirmative side. Thank you.
Alrighty, y'all ready? Alright. Can you give me a water bottle? I'm a little parched. Alright. So first off on T, there's no offense on T. There's no reason for you to vote against us on this. So we're kicking T, and you don't need to vote against us on this. There's no offense. So drop T. Okay, on to the disad. The way that they attacked our uniqueness is they said that balance is good for legal action, but the difference between what the executive orders now and the executive orders before is that the executive orders before were legal and now they're illegal. When we asked them about specifics about where they were illegal and where they were legal, they could not give us any actual specifics. Therefore, they have no warrants behind this claim. And so you have to drop the claim that all the executive orders that are made are legal, that are this new executive orders are illegal. That's completely not right, especially since Congress has the right to be able to veto executive orders, and if they are illegal, Congress vetoes them. Yes.
Doesn't Congress veto actually come in after the executive order has been enacted for, I believe it's 90 days the veto takes place after?
I'm not sure about the 90 days of the time frame part, but Congress does have the right to veto executive orders. Since they have the right, then we're keeping everything in balance. If we were to get rid of executive orders, we're no longer keeping things in balance. Now, onto their attack on our third uniqueness. They said that there's no way to restore balance because the president has all this power. However, the president doesn't have all the power that they are trying to get you to believe that he has. The president has the amount of power that is allowed to him by the government. The president is voted in. He is a voted-in official that's in for a limited amount of time. He has less power than anyone in Congress. Congress has the ability to stay in congressmen have the ability to stay in Congress for as long as they keep on getting voted in. Because of that, then they have so much more power than the president ever is able to have, especially since the president is under so much public scrutiny. The president is under so much pressure from the government, from foreign policy. The president doesn't have the amount of power that they want you to believe that he has. They also said that immigration should be in the legislative branch because it needs to be debated. Immigration has been in the legislative branch for years. We still haven't gotten any immigration reform. Nothing effective has happened. We're just having more and more problems. The way to effectively make this work, and the immigration bill that they're talking about is the DREAM Act. And what the DREAM Act does, which we talk about in our impact scenario, is all it does is allows for immigrants that may be illegal to have their kids that are born in the United States get the benefits of going to college, so they're out of poverty. This is a really good act. It's a good thing for the president to pass through because it allows people to not be impoverished. So they say that immigration should be debated in the legislative branch, but we can't have it debated in the legislative branch because nothing's getting done and people are stuck in the cycle of poverty over and over and over again. People aren't getting their education, there's no access, and so it's a really bad cycle of poverty that people continue to be stuck in. I'll get you a question at the bottom of this paper. They also said that we want our legislative votes to go to something. Like I said before, presidents are a voted for official. So, and they have to get more time in a certain amount of time because they have term limits. And so Congress doesn't have all of those things. Yeah, they're voted in, but they continue to get voted over and over and over again. This is why we have such a low congressional approval rate, because Congress has no way of getting anything done. They just keep on having the same people in Congress over year after year after year. And since they do that, they aren't able to have any new fresh ideas. They have all these old people, all these old like white men that continue to have the same ideas and don't get anything done. When we allow for term limits and presidents and executive orders, allow presidents to have executive orders, they're able to actually get things done, which is what's really important here. They also said that the Emancipation Proclamation happened during wartime. Lincoln tried to get this stuff done before wartime. The Emancipation Proclamation happened out of wartime. So by their definition, if we agree that the only time that presidents can pass executive orders is during wartime, almost every single executive order that we've had is out of wartime. So, and they also said in their background that there's different kinds of executive orders, not just wartime. Go on to, I'll get your question now.
Okay, so if you say that several times that nothing ever gets done in Congress, so Congress has a bad approval rate, but if you say that, how do you justify the 1,200 bills a year that Congress passes fully through the
I'm not saying that they get nothing done. I'm saying they don't get enough done. On to the background, like my partner says, flow across the argument on there's been 7,300 executive orders in 250 years. So there's no way that every single one of those were during wartime. We haven't had that many wars. We've had the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and both of the World Wars, and the Iraq War. And the Revolutionary War doesn't even count. So the 7,300, they're saying that all of those were legal, that except for from the 90s on. That doesn't make any sense or contradiction right there. Go on to their solvency. The only solvency they gave is that the president can no longer abuse executive orders. They have no warrants for this. They have no idea or claims or evidence for why this is true, so it's abusive for them to actually just say this claim out and not have any warrants behind it. It's not abusive for the president to have executive orders. Go on to advantage 1. Like I said just now, in their uniqueness, they said that the presidents abuse their executive order power. Like I said, no warrants. Go to the internal link scenario. They're actually masking the problem here. They're not getting to the root cause. The root cause is the corruption in the government and the problems within the bureaucracy of the government. They're not actually addressing that. They're just masking the problem by saying we need to get rid of executive orders and take away the power from the president. When in fact, taking away the power of the president bites our disad and would completely throw off the balance of the entire United States federal government. The reason that the framers set it up this way is so that the executive branch had the equal amount of power as the legislation or the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Because of that, if we were to completely get rid of the executive order, that is the power of the president. If we were to get rid of that, the executive order and the reason to have a president is basically gone. We don't need a president without executive orders. Their second internal link, they say that the one person gets to decide on things, and that's really bad. We want to turn this because we want to be able to get some stuff done. If we don't have the one person that says, okay, I'm going to actually get something done here instead of just continuing to have this cycle of gridlock where we can't get anything done, I'm going to actually get something done and do something about this problem because it's a really big problem immediately, then that's actually really good. We want one person to be able to make that decision, especially since Congress has the opportunity to veto that. And like I said earlier, Congress has a really low approval rating because they can't get anything done because of their gridlock. Also, on Impact 1, they said that this is going to lead to dictatorships. We've had 7,300 executive orders in 250 years. I don't see a dictatorship. There hasn't been a dictatorship. It hasn't happened. It's highly improbable. There's no time frame, and this isn't actually going to happen. They also use this claim that there's rumors that Obama wanted to eliminate term limits. Are we going to base our facts on rumors? That's bad for education. That's bad for debate. Go to Advantage 2. They said that executive orders are classified, and that's bad. Privacy is really good, especially if it protects the citizens. On the impacts, they want to basically destroy checks and balances, cross-apply or disad on this one. And on the third advantage, Congress can veto, so it's not illegal. Do you need any of my flows?
I don't think I got it.
Okay, so here, go ahead.
I don't know why I have my pen up here. Roll over. Okay. So I'm going to go in the order that we've been going in. So DA, then the AF case, and I'll tell you some voters throughout. So is everybody ready? Okay, so first off, on our disadvantage. Like my partner stated, there is no effective offense on this at this point, or what am I saying, on this piece of paper. They make attack about how we have to have legal actions, and that these legal actions, these legal executive orders can only be done during wartime. However, most of the executive orders have been done not in wartime. Like, they try to say that the Emancipation Proclamation was done during wartime. It wasn't. It was done before the Civil War. It was like right before the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln's like, I'm going to get rid of slavery, and he had to do this. This had been the problem of slavery had been up in the air since the Constitution had been created. People wanted it to be abolished during the creation of the Constitution. It didn't get done. People wanted it to get abolished during the Missouri Compromise. It didn't get done. Congress repeatedly ignored this issue and just scooted it under the rug. And so there had to be an executive order to get this done, to get slavery abolished. If there had not been an executive order, we could still have slavery today, because that's how bad of a controversial issue it was. And that's how much people did not just want to address it. They just wanted to say, it's not there, but it was. And so Abraham Lincoln had to go in and say, we need to do this. So that entire argument on that it has to be a legal action, it has no value in this round, because we haven't seen any of the problems, and we've had 250 years and 7,300 executive actions, and none of their impacts have happened. I mean, that's 250 years. That's a long time. There could have been dictatorship during George Washington. It didn't happen. Going on to the links, they make an argument that we have to have the voice of the people, but this is the problem with Congress. Congress isn't voicing the people anymore. They are a bunch of older men, they are white men, and they are not representing minorities, and they're not representing the youth of the nation. They are not representing the population anymore. And that's why Congress has such a bad approval rate, because they're not representing the people anymore, and that's why Congress just can't get anything done. We get so few bills done. Instead of getting a bunch of bills, we just table them and they just die in Congress. Most of the bills that get proposed in Congress die because Congress can't agree on them. So that means that point falls, which means that that everything on that case stands, and that our impacts still stand, and that we still, to get this Dream Act, we have to have an executive order, because most of the House of Representatives is Republican. So, and Republicans are not going to be as geared toward letting things dealing with immigration happen and pass in Congress. So that's why there has to be an executive order, because if we don't do this, that means an entire part of our population that was born here in America but has parents that immigrated from somewhere else and may not be legal citizens, is not going to have an education, so they're going to be stuck in poverty, and that is severely dehumanizing. And then we also get to that means our second impact still stands of it, how we need to put troops in Syria, because it's up in the air. Nobody wants to touch this, so there has to be an executive order so that we can save people and stop the spread of ISIS, which is a terminal impact, and that we have to stop death and dehumanization, which the negative case does. Going on to the going back for a minute, that is the first voter, is the fact that the disadvantage still stands and that the affirmative keeps biting into the disadvantage. So now going on to the AF. Going on to their solvency, yet again, they don't have any warrants. They say that there's been 7,300 executive orders, yet there isn't any of their impacts haven't been happened. 250 years is a long time to have a dictatorship. We should have had it happen already, just based on probability. It hasn't happened. So their solvency doesn't support their plan at all, so that means they don't have any solvency. Going on to their first advantage, their first advantage is all about how the executive branch keeps abusing its powers. However, Congress has the ability to veto, even if it's 90 days later. They have the power to veto that. So that means that Congress still has a bunch of power in government, so that the president doesn't have all the power. So that means that disadvantage falls. And they're talking about rumors, how there's rumors that we're going to have term limits, or Obama doesn't want to get rid of term limits, but we have facts, and facts what you need to look at. You don't need to look at rumors. You don't need to look at probability. The facts are that having an executive order has not caused all of the impacts that they say they're going to get.
Okay, I'm gonna go off case, on case, so T and then advantages, and then give some voters. Yeah, so T, disad, advantages, give some voters. Yeah. Okay, with that, let's get started. So what came up in their last speech, which I find kind of amusing, well, their last two speeches, which I find kind of amusing, was that all of Congress is old white men, and they are incapable of legislation. Oh, but Congress can veto presidency, so it's okay. Congress can check the president's powers, but Congress doesn't know what they're doing. Okay, So what's the purpose of Congress being able to veto if they don't know what they're doing? Then they'll just either check it off because they love it, or they'll disregard it for no real reason. And they also put themselves in a double bind when they said Congress actually is in gridlock and doesn't pass any bills. Well, on a light year in Congress, they passed 1,200 bills. I wouldn't say that's a gridlock that never passes bills. 1,200 bills is an insane amount of new bills to be passed in the United States. So we can see that this gridlock they're talking about and that Congress can veto the presidency and that would be great, just both inherently don't exist because they put themselves in a double bind in it if we believe their case that it's old white men that can't do anything in Congress. They also put themselves in another double bind with this and saying that, we want to give people the power and we're saying we want to give people power, but the people elect Congress. So the people still do have the power. So if the people see something wrong in Congress, they can elect someone else. So essentially this old white men mentality that they think Congress has, that they can't do anything, is also inherently untrue because we elect the people in Congress. We do that ourselves and we have the power to do that and it's our voice. So if there's a big problem with old white men, maybe we should be smarter in our votes. That's not Congress's problem. If anything, that's a people's problem, but we still want that power because it's a right of the people. So now with that, let's go over to the T. Now, really what they said against this is, well, there was no offense, so we can get rid of it. Well, our offense was that the executive branch won't check themselves. That's really just unrealistic. The president is going to go, I have too much power. Okay, I'm going to step back and just get rid of all my power because I'm abusing it. No, if he's abusing his power, he's not going to take away his own power. Like, that's not realistic whatsoever. So their T is unrealistic. We can see this predictable because we're broadening the range to all of the United States federal government. It's very predictable. As my partner said, the legislation is the one who does the job. And I stated in my opening speech that Congress is actually the one that actually amends the Constitution. The executive branch can't amend the Constitution, so he can't take away his own executive power. That's unrealistic, and so this T completely falls. When they say they have no offense, well, we do. So the T falls, so thus it's not a prior anymore. So if you're calling it a prior, they automatically lose because they lose in the T. So with that, let's go into our dissad. Now they said that it's been a lot of debate over the Emancipation Proclamation. Was it in war? Was it not? Well, it actually was in war. The South was seceding because the North wanted to get rid of slavery. And so, yes, outright fighting hadn't started, but there was major conflict between the two, between the North and the South. And so in itself, Abraham Lincoln defined it as a wartime Emancipation Proclamation. So we can see it wasn't wartime and thus was legal. On their entire dissad is based on this idea that Congress is so bad and thus we need to have the president. But they say, well, the president is checked by Congress. So again, double bind, their disadvantage falls, and we like I said, we vote in Congress, and so we have that power, so the power is to the people, so their disadvantage inherently falls, thus they don't garner any of their impacts. Now, most of their arguments on our advantages came out in their last two speeches. What essentially they were saying is that we don't have links, that privacy is good, and we want one man to make the decision. Well, as I stated in all my advantages, first of all, privacy in the government is not good. We want privacy to the people, but the government being private about their issues, that completely gets rid of checks and balances. We don't want the government to have privacy. We want the individuals to have privacy, not the government. So that argument falls. Advantage 2 stands. Advantage 3, they talked about a lot about the government veto. Again, that falls, so that still stands. Advantage 1, they talked about that essentially there's no link, but as I stated, it actually furthers government corruption because people have no voice when we let the president make all the decisions. And as I stated in POI, the executive order goes into act, and then there's a time period before the Congress can veto. So the harms that already happened. So today, when we look at the AF world and NEG world, we can see that yes, 250 years ago, these problems weren't happening, and it hasn't happened yet. However, they weren't making illegal decisions then and illegal executive orders. That has come recently in the past about 20 years, starting with Clinton, that it has been illegal. So when we look at time frame, we solve because the time frame needs to be now because the illegal proclamations are actually happening now. They weren't 250 years ago, they weren't 100 years ago. They're now, and so this needs to be put in place, and we solve for that. Probability, when we look at our impacts, the government team gives you the impact of dictatorship. Essentially, we have human rights violations because it leads to a dictatorship of one man leading. We have a broken government, and we have uprisings all over because of all the abuse, and the none of the impacts of the opposition stand. So for this reason, I can only see a government ballot.
Good job, ladies.
Good job.
Always fun
Nice to
meeting
meet
you
you
guys.
Every tournament.
Yeah.
Good job.